Hello and welcome to China Forum, the leading program in discussing the latest developments in Chinese culture, politics, and economics. My name is Betsy Gass and I will be your moderator for this program. Today we are very lucky to have two distinguished China specialists joining us. We have Dr. Richard Bush, current director for the Center of Northeast Asia Policy Studies and senior fellow in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. Before Brookings, Dr. Bush served as chairman and managing director at the American Institute in Taiwan. He served a long career with the U.S. government, working with Congress, the intelligence community, and the State Department. He's also published a large repertoire of books and articles focusing on U.S.-China relations, China-Taiwan relations, and Asian security issues. We also welcome Dr. Robert Sutter, visiting professor of Asian Studies at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and also professor of International Affairs at George Washington University. Much like Dr. Bush, Dr. Sutter also served in the government before beginning his academic career, specializing in Asian and Pacific affairs and U.S. foreign policy. This included work with the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress, the Central Intelligence Agency, the State Department, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Dr. Sutter has published a wide array of articles, scholarly works, and more than 17 books, including his most recent book, U.S.-Chinese Relations, Perilous Past, Pragmatic Present. Dr. Sutter and Dr. Bush, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Sure. On today's program, we'll assess the current status of the China-Taiwan relationship and the upcoming 2012 Taiwanese presidential election. Taiwanese will be voting on whether to keep the current KMT administration president, Ma Ying-jeou, in power, or to elect the opposition president, Tsai Ying-wen, chairwoman of the Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP. I'll begin our questions with Dr. Bush. Dr. Bush, Ma Ying-jeou's KMT administration has made remarkable progress over the past few years in strengthening ties with China and with Taiwan through the passage of a number of economic and social agreements, including the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, which was heralded as a huge step in improving the unstable relationship. What does the common Taiwanese voter think of these agreements and about President Ma's efforts in strengthening ties with the mainland?
The average Taiwanese voter will look at these developments based on what their effect has been on him or her. If he believes he's benefited from the improved ties and closer economic relations, then he is more likely to support President Ma and the KMT. If, on the other hand, he or she believes that Taiwan is worse off now because of the Ma administration, is more likely to vote for the DPP. So it's really about the consequences of President Ma's policies, which is what a democratic election should be all about.
Okay. Dr. Sutter, can you explain to us a little more about the stance of the Democratic Progressive Party and maybe why a voter would be leaning towards voting for them this year?
Well, of course, the Democratic Progressive Party has moved to the center in dealing with cross-strait issues. It's not nearly as adamant as it was under the leadership of President Chen Shui-bian. I think if I look at the attractiveness of the DPP candidate and why people would vote for them, it is heavily on their personal experience. How are they doing in the economy of Taiwan? I'm sure some are doing very well in Taiwan, but some aren't, or they feel they're not. And probably the second issue is trust. Do they trust President Ma Ying-jeou? And I think that's something that is, it's been nagging President Ma for a long time. And I'm not sure how the voters in Taiwan will look at him at this juncture. As Dr. Bush indicated, the cross-strait relationship will be judged on how it impacts individuals in Taiwan. I think the polls show it's pretty popular, what he's been doing in cross-strait relations. But the issue of trust continues to nag him. What is he up to? What are the implications of what he's doing? And I think the economic conditions and the issue of trust are the two reasons why the DPP candidate might do well.
Mm-hmm. In terms of their campaign, what kind of position are they setting out to attract the normal Taiwanese voter, and do you think that this will be productive, the DPP?
Oh, I think the DPP is trying to be as moderate as they possibly can, given the nature of their constituency. They have a dilemma. They can't get too close to the cross-strait policies of President Ma. They have a particular problem with the one China principle, which they find impossible to accept. And there's a way that President Ma has used to get around this involving the so-called 92 consensus, and they seem to stay away from that as well. So they're trying to be moderate, and I think they are more moderate than they used to be, but they can't really endorse the kind of approach that President Ma has taken in cross-strait relations. And so this is going to be a problem if they get elected. This will be a problem in dealing with China, because these principles are very important for China. But in the meantime, I think as they move to the middle, another problem they have is, can they mobilize their strong supporters, the so-called dark green voters of Taiwan, or will these people sort of sit on their hands in dealing with the election? I don't think they'll sit on their hands, but I do think that their enthusiasm may vary depending on the position of Tsai Ing-wen and how she goes into the election. And so in sum, I just think the getting the right position for the DPP candidate on cross-strait issues is extremely difficult. And there are trade-offs. If she moves too much to the middle, she'll alienate her voter base. If she moves to her voter base, she'll alienate the middle. So it's a very tough call for her.
I agree with that. I think the way she's trying to square this circle is to emphasize the negative consequences of cross-strait economic interaction and say that Taiwan is becoming a more unequal society because of economic integration, that the poor are getting poorer, average working people are getting poorer, and it's only rich people who benefited. Also, there will be charges that Ma has sold out Taiwan's sovereignty. They don't talk too much about what that means, but they make the charge. At the same time, Ms. Tsai is being very coy about what her own cross-strait policies would be. We know what she's against, but we're not clear what she's for and what the consequences of that would be.
Well, if there was a DPP victory in January, if Ms. Tsai was elected president, do you think that this would put a huge halt in the cross-strait progress that they've made over the past few years? Could that stall any recent developments that they've made?
I think there's a very good chance that cross-strait relations would stall because the basic principle that China has used to engage with the Ma administration is opposition to Taiwan independence and adherence to the 1992 consensus. Ma has been willing to do that, and that has allowed negotiations and agreements. The DPP is not willing to do that, either of those things. And so it's hard to see how you would have much engagement between the two sides were the DPP to come to power. I'm not sure there would be a reversal. I think implementation of past agreements would be more difficult, but maybe the PRC would just try to wait out a DPP administration. I think it's also worth saying that you could have a stall under a second Ma administration as well.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that if the DPP candidate does win, that they will have problems enforcing things like the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement and the other agreements that they've had in the past?
I don't think they'll have problems with the, as Dr. Bush indicated, and I agree, I don't think they'll have problems implementing the existing agreements by and large. I think the idea of a stall, though, is a very important feature of what's happening, what would happen under these circumstances. That's the danger. They'll have to find a new way around the difference they have over the one China principle. And I think this is cumbersome and very difficult to do. And if the Tsai administration isn't willing to accept the 92 consensus, then how will she do it? And we don't know, and it's very difficult to see how she could do it easily. Keep in mind that it takes two to tango, and the other side of this equation is China. And China's in the midst of a leadership transition. And so this makes it tougher for them too. It's hard to compromise on an issue like Taiwan in a time. It's always hard to compromise on an issue like Taiwan and China, but it's particularly hard when you're dealing with the delicate situation of a leadership transition in China. And so the prospects of a stall, some sort of a stall, I think are better than other prospects that one might think of in the cross-strait relationship if the DPP candidate wins. And it doesn't mean that this will be a crisis or anything like that, but it won't be, there won't be fast movement forward under those circumstances.
To supplement my previous remarks, I think the resistance to good implementation of these agreements would come from the PRC side, the Chinese side, rather than the Taiwan side. I think they would be cautious about carrying out what they've agreed to.
Mm-hmm. So depending on the outcome, how do you think that the Chinese government and the Taiwanese government are likely to work together in the future? If it's the Ma administration, are they more likely to push forward with more economic and social agreements, or even go onwards to political agreements? Or if it's the DPP candidate, Ms. Tsai, do you think there will be a harsh backlash between the Chinese and Taiwanese governments there?
I think if it's a Tsai administration, the whole thing's likely to stall, but how bad it gets is very difficult to predict. If there's a second Ma administration, I think that there will be forces in China that will push for political talks of some kind, perhaps a peace accord. It's not clear that President Ma will want to go there. That would be rather controversial within Taiwan, and it's not clear what benefits Taiwan would get. It would probably have to provide China with a more definitive version of the One China principle. It would have to formalize commitments about opposing Taiwan independence. And that may be a little bit too much for the Taiwan public to bear. Mm-hmm. Also, I'd say that there is a lot of work that still has to be done on the economic side. That's certainly not complete yet.
Mm-hmm. I agree with this. There are several uncertainties that we all watch carefully. One of them has to do with how do we think about the Chinese leadership. I think the Hu Jintao administration has managed the Taiwan relationship pretty effectively. But if you look at the nature of Chinese behavior around Taiwan, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, with Japan, with India, it's not well managed. It's it's often conflicted. They seem to be going on different paths. And so one has to ask oneself, will the leadership be able to have a coherent approach, the Chinese leadership, the new one, be able to have a coherent approach vis-a-vis Taiwan, or will there be forces, there are many voices influencing Chinese foreign relations these days, will there be voices that will push for different approaches to Taiwan? Some will push harder for compromise on political issues, for example. Is that likely? Can it be held under control? And this one is very difficult to judge. I think it's a real issue that we should be thinking about, but what it actually means, what it will mean in practice, is not quite clear. And talking to specialists and listening to specialists on this issue, they really two poles. One pole says there's a basic cohesion about Taiwan policy. Hu Jintao has been managing this very effectively, and it will go smoothly. But the other is that Hu Jintao has basically three harmonies that he pushes. One harmony is a domestic harmony, one harmony is international harmony, and one harmony is cross-strait relations. And the first two, I heard this from Professor Li Chang, who gave this remark about a month ago here in Washington. Mm-hmm. I think it's right to worry about this. The first two harmonies haven't gone very well. You know, the domestic situation isn't really very harmonious, and the foreign relations of China aren't all that harmonious either. And so could this spill over and affect Taiwan policy? This dissent and pressure and different voices influencing policy. This is something that we need to watch very carefully because it's really it's not resolved as far as I can see. I think we've seen a shift away from the assertiveness of 2009, 2010 in Chinese foreign relations to a more peaceful approach outwardly. But the actions of the Chinese administration reflect a continued friction or continued differences. And so with Taiwan, this could be a problem, particularly if you have someone who changes the continuity. I'm talking about the DPP candidate. If that person gets elected, you could have a different type of approach. So it's something to watch, for our audience to watch, it seems to me as well.
To make matters worse, we should keep in mind that the PRC does not always have accurate perceptions of their external environment. They watch things going on in Taiwan, and they may read them as more threatening than they actually are. They may take actions based on their misperception, which only makes the situation worse.
Well, between now and the election, what are some probable events you might foresee that could push one candidate ahead of the other, whether it's President Ma or Ms. Tsai? Are there any events that you could foresee changing their campaigns?
Well, I think two things could help Tsai Ying-wen. One is a global economic downturn, perhaps flowing from our failure to get our economic house in order. Second would be some sort of big domestic problem in Taiwan that the Ma administration mishandled. A good example of this is the typhoon that went through Taiwan about 2 years ago. The government did not do a good job in disaster prediction, relief, and so on, and Ma bore the political cost of that. We're into typhoon season now. Would they do a good job? If they don't, Ma will suffer. Then, you know, in a couple of recent elections, we've had violent incidents, very high profile, an assassination attempt at President Chen Shui-bian in 2004, and 2009, somebody took a shot at the son of former Vice President Lian Zhan. So Taiwan is not an absolutely peaceful place. How that would shift things, it's very difficult to know, but it's a wild card there.
Just to add to the list, I think that's a very good list, and is China. And what will China do? And getting back to the point of China is restraining its assertiveness that right now, but I'm uncertain as to how lasting this would be. Could there be a big episode in the Korean area or in the South China Sea, something that would really get a lot of attention? These kinds of things can happen. Or you could have this serendipitous type of thing. Maybe 10 years ago, there was a big episode where a whole bunch of Chinese Taiwan tourists were killed in an incident in China. And this had a big impact for a while. And this kind of thing can happen as well. So there's a long list of things that could lead to a change in the election results.
Do you think that President Ma, in the lead up to January, will be taking any preventative measures to push for greater integration with China, maybe to fast forward or to increase some of the reforms that he's been making with China?
I don't think so. I think it gets back to the issue of trust. He wants to keep as much trust in the voters in Taiwan as he can. And if he starts moving forward rapidly with cross-strait relations in some way, I think this could raise the issue of trust. What is he up to? What is the end outcome of this going to be for Taiwan? And how will it affect issues of Taiwan's sovereignty? So I think this is something that he would probably be more cautious about.
I agree with that. There are 4 agreements under the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement that are still to be negotiated. I would look for an attempt to make progress on 2 of them. One is a dispute settlement agreement, and the other has to do with investment protection for Taiwan-owned companies that operate on the mainland. Those are both good for Taiwan, and so he has a political reason to do those. The two others have to do with trade in goods and trade in services. Those would affect some interests positively and others negatively. I agree with Dr. Sutter on that those are likely to be put off because they just create political problems at a time when you don't want political problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, what does the U.S. think about the current China-Taiwan relationship? Are we encouraging greater cross-strait relations, or are we kind of taking a neutral stance towards it?
First, the Bush administration and now the Obama administration have positively endorsed the progress that has been made between the two sides of the strait since Ying-jeou came into office. The two sides are actually doing what we hoped they would do for a long time. We are not naive about the dangers that are lurking. We understand the political pressures that President Ma has to face. At the same time, we will be absolutely neutral with respect to the outcome of the election. That's for the Taiwan voters to decide, we will say, and what's important to us are the policies of the new administration and whether they fit with U.S. interests.
From a U.S. perspective, I would, and this is more broad than the administration perhaps, but I think to put it in perspective, at least I put it in perspective by saying it was so disruptive for the United States in the previous 15 years, the period from the mid-90s until the end of the Chen Shui-bian administration in 2008. There's just a tremendous sense of relief that we don't have to face this kind of crisis, repeated crises in the Taiwan Straits. It was extremely dangerous from the American point of view during that period. And so President Ma's approach really helps manage this tension in a way that really is adds to the relief that Americans feel about this situation. And I think that's going to be with us for a long time because the people that are making the decisions are people who lived through this period of repeated crises in cross-strait relations. So the U.S. Officials involved in this, their recent memory is very much influenced by these experiences. And the details of this aren't well known in many respects, but I think, and I can assure you, it was searing. It was something that was extremely worrisome. And so, the idea of these exchanges, improving the relationship, easing tensions, this is great, I think, from the point of view of people who have had that type of experience.
Mm. Well, one of our serious links to the tripartite relationship of U.S. and China and Taiwan is our sale of arms and fighter jets to them. Does the potential sale of fighter jets to them this coming fall, would that potentially be a boost for the Ma administration in his re-election, or what are the perceptions of that?
I think it would be a boost. I'm not sure how much it is. This election is really a fight over setting the agenda, and I'm not sure that the U.S. relationship would rise to the top of anybody's agenda. So I think it'll help, but I'm not sure it'll help a whole lot. It's more important for Ma to make the case that Taiwan is better off economically and in other ways because of his policies. The other thing that the United States could do that would be received well in Taiwan, probably more than arms sales, is establishment of a visa waiver program, which makes it easier and cheaper for Taiwan citizens to come to the United States. That would be pretty popular because a lot of Taiwan citizens do come to the United States.
It's really interesting I agree with this perspective of Dr. Bush, but it's really interesting because when you look at it from the American policy discussion on this issue that you see in the media and so forth, arms sales looms very high in the American calculus, and visa waiver doesn't even make the list. You say, nobody's talking about visa waiver, I mean, the specialists talk about it, but basically this isn't discussed. And the argument is that this means more for the voters in Taiwan than F-16s, whereas from the American point of view, this is seen as something of a test of U.S. How far is the U.S. prepared to go in supporting Taiwan? And this is the symbol that it's used to demonstrate the U.S. support for Taiwan. So there's a little bit of a disconnect here between what the impact in Taiwan and actually and how the debate is carried out here in Washington. And I think it's emblematic of a change in how important is the United States for Taiwan. And I think in the past, when Taiwan was confronting China, the United States was extremely important for Taiwan. But I think since that's shifted, Taiwan is no longer confronting China. Taiwan is trying to get along with China. I think the salience of U.S. support in arms sales and other things is still important. It's still a boost, it's still a political signal, and President Ma still wants it. But the salience of the United States overall, I think, is reduced in this atmosphere where Taiwan is no longer confronting China. It's trying to get along with China. It's accommodating China in a whole range of ways. And so it's a very different dynamic. And I think the salience of the U.S. in that equation is a bit less than it was previously.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left. I wanted to go ahead and ask you one last question. Do you think that as China and Taiwan continue their relations, or if they end up halting the progress and strengthening their relations in the future, what role can the U.S. play? You were saying that our salience in the relationship has decreased a little bit. Do you think we'll still support them through the sales of arms and weaponry, or do you think that we might be a diminished role in their relationship?
Well, I think our salience has diminished because of the nature of the change in Taiwan's relations with China. It doesn't mean we're unimportant, but it does mean that our salience is somewhat reduced. I think my sense is that we will follow the current policy that we're following. It's a very careful policy. It's designed to deter China from attacking Taiwan. The U.S., I think, is determined to do that. At the same time, to help Taiwan build up its capabilities within the context of a relationship with China that we want to manage in a constructive way. And so this kind of balance that the U.S. is trying to establish vis-a-vis China and Taiwan, I think will persist. And the Ma approach is something that fits very nicely with that situation. And so Taiwan and China engaged, they're more constructive, and that eases tensions, makes it easier for the United States to manage relations with China. I think this is seen as a good thing from the U.S. point of view, and will probably continue to be seen in the interest of the United States.
A couple of points. First of all, as Taiwan's liberalizing trade with China, it should liberalize with others as well. And it looks to the United States as one of those liberalizing partners. Second, if the second Ma administration were to agree to negotiate a peace accord with China, one thing that China would insist be on the table is U.S. arms sales to Taiwan and the U.S. security relationship with Taiwan. And so Taiwan and the United States would have to think long and hard about what to agree to on those specific points.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great discussion. And thank you to our audience. It was a pleasure having you join us. We look forward to having you on our next China Forum program.